Welcome to Widemindedness with Victoria Ball, the podcast in which I interview expert guests who want to join me in celebrating that life is not black and white. Our society is increasingly divided, and the us versus them mentality seems to dominate our conversations and relationships with others. I believe that life is much richer when we widen our minds to consider multiple opinions and perspectives. So challenge your assumptions and let's become truly wide-minded together. I am delighted to welcome Kathleen O'Hara to the Widemindedness podcast. Kathleen is an international psychotherapist with 27 years of experience. She works with individuals and families facing the complex mental health and well-being challenges of the 21st century. She is the author of A Grief Like No Other, Exploring Traumatic Bereavement, and is a consultant for the Federal Office for Victims of Crime in the US Department of Justice. She has developed programs for victim service organizations globally. She travels for her work and has offices in Los Angeles, New York, and London. So hello, Kathleen, hello.
Hello, Victoria. Good to hear you.
You are in Los Angeles and I'm here in the UK. Thank you so much for coming on to talk to me about wide-mindedness. And I was so pleased that your response was so excited and aware that this is something we need to be talking about.
Yes.
It seems to me that so many of the conflicts that we have in our personal relationships, not to mention politics, come from this idea that because I think something, it must be true. Is that a fair assessment?
I think that's a very accurate assessment. Confusing opinion and feeling with fact. And of course, facts are so suspect these days that people readily confuse them. And because they believe them, it infuses it definitely with more passion, more anger, and more conflict.
And would you say conflict is something that we're not great at dealing with?
Yeah, I was giving this some thought, and I remember years ago in the 90s in graduate school in San Francisco, where I attended, there was a conversation about celebrating differences. And at the time, everybody wanted to do that because there wasn't really enough of that. Okay, so it was good. But I remember saying to one of my professors, is this really what we want to do? Shouldn't we be celebrating what we have in common? Because in my mind, that sort of thing could lead to conflict and divisiveness. And by the way, the discussion was a pleasant discussion, but it was decided that, celebrating differences was important. And I think that got into the water, so to speak. And what you started to have was the celebration of differences, which then started to be identifying with differences to the point where you defend your differences to the extent where you cannot tolerate someone who isn't different. And I think that to me is part of the history of that. That's where we've come to. So what I believe, what my difference is trumps your difference. Mine is more important. And it creates inherently a conflict in people's discussions. We now defend that difference with our lives. And it also, I think, has to do with, early tribal identification too. The tribe has to survive, so we all share a common theme, a common belief against the other tribes. That's what makes us different.
That's so interesting. It's an us versus them mentality.
Exactly. It isn't we're all in this together. It's no, we are XYZ, you are ABC, therefore we are in conflict. And I think that it didn't necessarily start that way, but somewhere along the line, the primitive mentality of humans, which is to defend their territory, started to defend the us versus you or them. And that's where we started. So then it became a vehicle for conflict and anger. In terms of psychology, displaced anger. Well, I'm really angry at XYZ. It must be their fault. So therefore, we have a gulf between us, and we can't share and celebrate our similarities that bring us together as humans. It's us against them. This is a very, very dangerous place for humanity to be.
You're completely right. It starts on that micro individual level and it has a societal impact. When it scales up, this affects our societies and the way we interact as nations. I know you work a lot with families. Do you think that social media, for example, has exacerbated this?
Well, I think social media is a platform for what makes me different and what makes me great. So yes, I think there can be a potential problem there for people sharing, because what you're sharing is what you think you're celebrating and what you want people to believe, right? Let's say even in Instagram or things like that. Other platforms, which you identify an ideology against everybody else, is a place for you to work out your anger about everybody else. And so you only read what's going to support your belief system, not the facts, by the way, but what you believe. And then you feel really powerful within the group. And remember, in a tribe, everybody has their place and they agree on a level of beliefs that bond them together against the other.
That is frightening, but so accurate. That idea that we construct our own identity in relation to something we are not.
Because it's safer to do that. Right? Again, if you're celebrating the differences, it actually extends to the differences of your tribe. For example, in Brexit, Londoners were different than everybody else in the country. And they celebrated that difference by saying, well, we're just smarter, better, and they're, not very intelligent over there. I mean, that is a prime mechanism for how people differentiate between us and them. They mass an entire group into certain characteristics. They differentiate them. We're different because we know better. And this has created such a struggle with different groups. And by the way, is now being characterized as the elitists versus the, other people. And so you have this very dangerous place where, again, it's us and them. And we do not want to have this going on now.
I can understand completely from a societal level why we would not want this. But can you just say a little on why this might also not be beneficial for our own mental health?
Yeah, that's a very good point, because if I only believe what I believe and I'm determined to defend it, one, it kind of stultifies your mental ability to adapt and to embrace new ideas, doesn't it? You're stuck in a worldview. So forget about conflict for the moment. Just from a mental health perspective, you can't grow very much because you're locked into a belief system that you're willing to defend at any cost. So therefore, you can't have other people come in from the other group because you've set a tone where I'm right, you're wrong. So there's a rigidity there. It's the brain and the mind can't grow and open. So I think that is like, it's a atrophy of human qualities. and the human ability to share. So from a personal point of view, it's not a good thing, obviously, because then, of course, you have to associate with people who agree with that narrow focus of yours. You have to marry people like that. You have to work with, I mean, it really creates ghettos of thought.
Which, as you say, helps or creates a situation where we atrophy, we don't grow, we don't learn from others.
Right. So where are the human qualities there? They're forced into a very narrow slice of life.
The problem I see is that the more we do this, the more we lose the skills and the tools
Mm.
to engage with and connect with different people.
Right. And wasn't that the whole point of travel and reading books and going and enjoying other cultures was to learn how other tribes do things, what they think, what that's the enjoyment of the difference, not the squaring off of the difference.
So if we are not making the most of the opportunities that we now have, really more than ever, to widen our minds and to engage with different ideas, what do we need to do to wake up that part of our mind?
The first thing I think we need to do is have awareness of where we're coming from. In other words, you tackle the issue of belief and fact. Preface the conversations with, this is what I believe, not this is the fact. And even the tone that drives it. No, like I was talking to someone the other day, and we were, and I don't know the person very well. We were having a conversation, and I felt that this assault of perceived facts. And it was very uncomfortable because they weren't facts; they were opinions. So I think that if we can censor ourselves and be aware that what I believe is what I believe, it's not what everybody believes. Doesn't it could be factual, but it's not necessarily the last word.
Yeah, and it's okay to have different opinions. That's
Yes.
that's normal.
Exactly. Then you can truly celebrate a difference. How this whole thing may have started out, which was the celebration of the difference, not the defend to the death of the differences.
And of course, our opinions should be different. They're made up of our own backgrounds, our own experiences, and that's what makes life interesting.
Well, right. And that's what helps us grow, because at the end of a conversation that can be a passionate conversation, but it's prefaced with, this is what I believe and this is why I believe it, and let's share our beliefs, you can end up learning so much, and it enriches your human experience because you actually come away, and instead of feeling, oh, well, that person's wrong and they don't know anything, and that tone, that awful tone, you come away with something so much more pleasant and useful.
Exactly. And that's something that I'd love to go further with you on because I think when we don't embrace wide mindedness, we become really angry very
Yes.
quickly. And anger, as you can tell us, is so bad for our mental health.
It is. I mean, and what is the point of getting so angry about something that you would defend it first by alienating the other person, and secondly, even to the extent of your relationships, your life, what you do. I mean, really, there's that much at stake. We need to dial this back and open our minds.
And if somebody said to you that they were struggling with having these conversations, that the way they dealt with them was just to shut them down, what would you advise them?
Take a breath, dial back the presumptions and the arrogance that we all know everything completely. Dial it back and have a little bit of wide-mindedness to think, I don't have to defend myself. I can have an opinion. And you might be able to ask the other person to agree to do the same. Like, can we enjoy our differences? We don't know how to diffuse a situation. So we get very angry, and then we think, okay, well, I'm just going to shut this down because I can't talk to this person. So even the tone there is different. So maybe just to take that breath and say, look, we have a difference of opinion. Let's just, listen to each other and see if that works. This is going to take a long time to undo. This isn't going to happen overnight. First, we have to have awareness. Secondly, the willingness to dial it down and to learn from each other.
These are ingrained habits. I think it is all too easy just to shut these conversations down, to not engage with different people. That is easier, but it's not the richest, fullest experience. So we need to retrain ourselves.
We do. And I think if you can track the anger and possible arrogance when you feel yourself doing that. And I know I do. I get very, when I see something in the news, I might get at what I try to do is be aware that, I'm going down that path. I can be, like Plato says, justifiable, kind of indignation. But if I take it much past that, now I'm just an angry person. There's not much constructive thought or even action going on there.
No, and it backs you into a corner within your own mind that you're angry and you're defending yourself against the world. I know from my experience that fills up my brain. It takes away all of the bit that would be doing something creative or productive.
Absolutely. It's better, as you say, to put that aside, focus on the creative part of the brain that can actually solve the problem.
Is there anything that you could recommend that I or anybody listening to this can do on a daily basis to get better at listening to others and considering others' perspectives?
One of the things that it is important or can work is tracking your thoughts and address them. Why am I thinking that? That's not necessarily true. Can I be more wide-minded about this? Read something different. Practice expanding your mind instead of closing it. It helps with all kinds of thoughts, anxiety, OCD, everything, to track the thoughts and start to master them.
Such a useful tip, because we believe that whatever comes into our brain is truth. And just like opinion, it's not truth. It's just the product of our experience.
Absolutely. What we think is not necessarily fact, thank God. Because if it was, we'd all be in trouble. So to do the, like, why am I thinking that?
And I think we have the perfect opportunity to do that at the moment. We're all pretty much around the world in some level of self-isolation. We're alone with our thoughts a lot more. And it is, in a sense, a good time to work on checking those thoughts and putting a new habit into practice every day.
Absolutely, because the thoughts, particularly at this time, as you say, in isolation, will have a tendency to get very fearful and negative because this is such a scary time. On the upside, we're all in this together. There is a common enemy, and the enemy is the virus. Not a them and us, it's something that is a neutral thing in a way.
It's a strange unifier.
It absolutely is. And maybe that is the silver lining of this time, is that we are confronting a common enemy. It's no longer us and them. It's all of us against something that could actually kill us, something real. So we're banding together, even though we've all agreed to isolate. When has that ever happened? That pretty much everybody's agreed on something. So this is a phenomenal time to not only get a grip on your thoughts, but not get stuck in the differences, but go back to what I originally said was, let's celebrate what we have in common.
Mm. So to sum up, if I could just ask you in a line, what would you say if I were to ask you why, for you, the concept of wide-mindedness is important? What do you see as its major benefits?
I think of the concept, it's just such a wonderful concept, as we're under the canopy of the sky, and we're all where we are on this earth, under this big, big sky, which is wide-mindedness. And we can be together under that sky, under that concept. And we can enjoy one another. We don't have to fight over the difference. We can realize we're all part of the same one humanity.
And I think that's it, bringing it back to a core humanity. Kathleen O'Hara, it has been an absolute delight having you on the Widemindedness podcast. Thank you so much.
My pleasure, Victoria, my pleasure.
I really hope you enjoyed this episode of Widemindedness with Victoria Ball. Help others learn about it by rating, reviewing, and subscribing. For more great wide-minded content, follow @Widemindedness Victoria Ball on Instagram, @Widemindedness on Twitter, and sign up to the monthly newsletter at victoria-ball.com.